Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting spider lilies as requested by Chimpy. Prior to this, I didn't know much about the flower, but when I searched it, I knew I've seen a lot of this flower on animes. So like usual, let's begin by breaking down the shapes. The flower consists of many small flowers. From what I searched, there are usually 7 in one main stem, but we're not going to worry about that. The individual flowers look like mini lily shapes. I like to draw it out as 5-petaled flowers with pointy tips, which curves backwards. The main tricky thing is the placement of the flowers as it circulates around the main stem. So here I'm just drawing out examples of different angles the flower might be facing. I've done this so many times for simple 5-petaled flowers, so I'm not going to repeat myself by drawing the ovals, but you can use ovals, of course, as guide to paint different perspectives for each of the small flowers. You can try to draw out as many different angles as you would like for practice, but I'm just going to show you how the flower looks like as a whole. Those small flowers bunch up in the middle and circulates around the main stem, creating a small bulb. I'm just drawing out a rough oval or a circle here, but this is something that you would need to imagine as you paint later if you decide to paint freehand, just like what I'm going to do. So it is best to practice the form while we're just drawing it out with pencil. And within that circle, I'm just going to draw out small flowers that I just drew out previously surrounding the shape, and I'm also going to draw one on top. As I mentioned before, there are most likely going to be around 7 flowers, so 6 surrounding it and 1 on top. This might be wrong though, but that's just how I'm going to roughly approach it for this painting. The most iconic feature and the most fun to draw and paint for this flower are the very long and delicate stamens which comes out of each flower. They curve up, which look like spider legs, and I guess that's where the name comes from. And as for the tip of those stamens, I'm also just going to add little teardrop shapes. I'm going to roughly draw and paint the stamens coming from the flowers. However, if I feel like I want to add more of those curved lines elsewhere just to fix the composition, I'm just going to add it with no worry. The only pointers here is that I would try to vary the length or height of the stamens so the placement stays nice and natural, and don't forget to add those curves for the flowers in front as well. The rounder the bulb looks, the higher the angle you're looking from. So it's as if you're looking from above the cluster. Whereas if you have more of a side view of the flowers, the circle will become more of an oval shape, which is what I'm drawing out here. Technically, it's similar, but you just wouldn't be able to see much of the flowers at the back. And I'm also going to finish it off with those fun curved stamens. Okay, so now that you have a basic idea of how to position the flowers, you can just play around or practice further if you need to, but I'm going to move on to the colors. So here are the list of colors that I'm going to be using for the painting. Firstly, I have New Gamboge by Daniel Smith, Quin Red by Daniel Smith, Crimson Lake by Holbein, Sepia by Holbein. The next one is Yellow Green. This is a mixture of Daniel Smith and Winsor Newton. It's actually a color that my friend mixed for me, but you can use any yellow-green color that you have. And lastly is Sap Green by M. Graham. I'm going to start with a mixture of Quin Red with a little bit of New Gamboge in a medium to thin consistency, and I'm going to start by drawing dots to help indicate the placement of the flowers. You don't have to do this, or even if you do, and if after you've painted a few flowers it seems too tight or too far apart, feel free to adjust the placement as you go, but it's just personally always easier than to start with a completely blank paper. So here I'm just going to paint each of the flowers. I try to make the flowers not touch too much, so if they're overlapping, I try to leave a tiny bit of space. Try to also control the load of your brush so each of those small flowers doesn't become too puddling wet. From here, I'm just going to paint the flowers individually. You can take your time doing this. It's actually really fun painting repetitive shapes in different angles, and it's actually really good practice. I'm using a fairly big brush for this, but if you have a smaller brush available, that will also help with your brush load so you don't accidentally make too much puddles due to the limited load. After I've painted most of the flowers, I feel like if I need to add petals or more flowers in certain areas, I'm just going to go ahead and do that because the main form of the small flowers are already there. I just want to make sure that the bulb is fairly rounded as a whole. Next, I'm going to take a medium consistency of just the Quin Red to paint on top of the flowers that I just painted, but only to paint the ones which are placed in front. So this way, the flowers at the front looks a bit more visible compared to the flowers at the back. You do want to make sure that the base color that you just previously painted is fairly dry at that point. So you can use a hairdryer if yours is still wet, but if you've controlled your brush load well enough while painting those small flowers, it shouldn't really take too long for them to dry. Next, I'm going to make a mixture of Crimson Lake with a tiny bit of sepia to create a dark red color, and I'm going to place this color at the center of the flowers to build a little bit of depth so it looks like the center is going inwards. For the flowers at the back, I tried to use a slightly thinner consistency because the red of the petals are slightly lighter, so I would adjust the value to suit the red. I'm going to leave the first flower for now and move on to the next bulb, so the flowers can be more of the focal point, whereas the other features can be painted around the main flowers. Obviously, you don't have to follow the same composition as what I'm doing here, but when you think about your composition, you can try to imagine the placement roughly before painting it, then paint on those dots if you find it easier to use as guide. For this composition, I'm going to paint 3 flowers. I'm going to use the same steps for this, and I'll get back to you when I'm ready to paint the next flower. In case any of you find that drawing or painting the flowers in different positions is a bit challenging, for the third flower, I'm not going to worry too much about painting the individual flowers properly. You'll see that the petals are not placed correctly, and you'll see that it'll still look fine because the main features will still be there. I've also seen this painted without the tiny flowers in mind, but with just a bunch of random petals, and it still works. So if you're new to painting or you find that the form is a little bit hard to portray, then you can just paint the flowers randomly without following too much of the form. As long as the curved petals are there and it still comes to an overall round shape altogether, it should be completely fine. But for the rest of this flower, I'm just going to paint it the same way as the ones before by layering the quin red and the dark red for the center of the flowers. Next, I'm going to take a bit of the quin red that I have on my palette and mix it with a bit of the dark red mixture. I'm just using a little for this to add shadows to the tip of some of the curved petals to just enhance the shape and also darken certain delicate areas. I think I'm fairly done with the flowers now, and I'm going to create a green mixture from sap green, a little bit of quin red, and yellow green to paint some of the finer stems peeking through the flowers. I'm trying to place them behind the flowers that I just painted, and I'm also going to direct them to the bottom center towards the main stem. Next is the most fun part, the stamens. You can just use quin red, but I have the previous mixture with the new gamboge as well. So I'm just going to use those colors because I don't want to waste them. You might also want to switch to your smallest brush available to make drawing the fine curved lines a bit easier. Or if you're not confident with your line control using a brush, you can also draw it out using red colored pencils or maybe a red ink pen with a very fine tip. Again, when painting the stamens, try to vary the height or length of those lines. And I also like to create different curved lines which overlaps each other to make the placement more natural. Now I'm going to go back with a slightly darker red by adding a little bit of Crimson Lake to the quin red. And I'm going to add more stamens, or if you've already painted too many of them, I tried to just paint on top of the previous red. I just want to vary the colors slightly, but this is optional if your painting is at a different stage where you don't want to add additional stamens. Next, I'm going to add those tiny teardrop shapes. I'm using new gamboge for that area, and I'm just going to tap and pull very lightly using the tip of my brush to create those shapes. Once I'm done painting the tips of the stamen, I'm going to move on to the main stem. For this, I'm just going to add more yellow-green to some of the dark green that I used previously and just paint the long stems for each of those clusters. When painting the stems, try to not paint over the flowers that you've just painted, but try to paint behind them. And I just find that this gives a cleaner look and it makes a nicer composition. For the top and bottom of the stems, I'm just going to layer a bit of a slightly darker green, and that's pretty much it for the flowers. But as you guys know, I love adding splatters, so I'm just going to add red splatters around the flowers and also manually place some of the dots for the sake of composition, and that's pretty much it for the painting. And this is the completed painting. This was a very interesting one for me to paint as it's quite different to any of the flowers that I've painted so far on my channel, but I hope you guys enjoyed it and learned something new. Like usual, the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in the description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!